All right, so let's now expand on our API so that we can not only search by user patterns, by path parameters, but also by query parameters. These parameters right here, this is data that is being passed from the client to the server, but it's embedded in the path. So they are referred to as path parameters. Okay, not to be confused with parameters that can be passed in the query string. All right, so everything that follows the question mark in a URL is referred to as the query string. Right? In this case, we have usernames and we have passwords. Right? So here we have parameters in the query string named username and password, whose values are username and passwords. Right? And they're delimited by ampersand. Right? They are parsed differently and provided differently on the server side. So let's see how we can handle them. Right? So one way that we would expect to be able to handle them is as follows. We would expect that we would do something like this. Question mark, username equals maybe a placeholder username, ampersand, password equal question mark password. It actually doesn't work that way. Right? The server ignores everything after the question mark. Right? So as far as the server is concerned, these two queries are identical. Right? It cannot distinguish one from the other. Right? So might as well just not use it. Right? We have this query is already parsing a query would also be executed if we pass the same /user and then the query string. Okay? Right, so how do we do that? How do we handle? So now, because we want to use this /API/user with a query string, this name we gave it, find all users, is actually a misnomer. Right? It's not just that one use case. It's actually going to be able to find users by username, find users by credential, or find all users. Right? So I'm going to rename this, instead of find all users, just give it a more generic name, maybe find users. Right? Find users instead of find all users. And returning all the users is just one special case. Right? If we have the username, we're going to search by username. If we have a username and password, we're going to find username and password. If we don't have either, then we'll return all the users. So this is only a special case. Okay? All right, so let's do that. Let's do that. So if we restart and we come here and we ask for all users, we still get the list of users. If I ask for a username equal Alice and Alice and password equal Alice, notice that it still returns all the list of users. So it's mapped to that find users. Yes? All right. So how can we? Let's see if we can do a little better. Right. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to go back and enhance this find users to first retrieve the query, those query parameters, the username and password, if they're there. They might not be there. Right? So let's retrieve them. So the username, we're going to retrieve it using the request, not params. Params parses the path parameters. Okay? To retrieve from the query string, we need to use query. Right? Query, and then the names that we're looking for. So over here would be username, and we're going to retrieve the password. Password. Okay? And now we can ask to see if we have the username or we don't have it. Let's see what we have. Right? So what we can do is that if we have both username and we have password, if they're both not falsy, meaning they're truthy, meaning they have some value, but it's not undefined, false, zero, or empty string, right? If it's none of those, then we want to handle them in a specific way, right? For instance, we might retrieve var user and try to find from users, find the user whose username return user whose username is equal to the username, and user dot password is equal to our password. Okay, right. So that will be the user. So if we have a user, if we did find a user, we are going to do response dot send back our user. Okay. If we didn't find it, we're going to respond JSON, maybe an empty object or null. Depends how you want to handle it on the client, right? If we want to send an error, however we want to send. We're going to come back to this on how is it that we're going to handle it on the client, right? Maybe an empty object would be better. If we don't have all the user, we could say else if. So let's try that first. Let's try just that one. Let's try that, and let's restart the server. Probably if we have username and password right here, we want to abort and immediately return. We don't want to continue and maybe return also all the list of users. We're just going to just return from this function. Let's restart the server. So now if we have Alice and Alice and we refresh, notice that indeed is returning only Alice. Or if we have Bob and Bob, right, it's returning just Bob, right? And we could certainly use this for the login function, right, and retrieve the users by credentials. All right, let's enhance this by being able to retrieve maybe by just the username, right? For instance, for registration purposes, we need to check to see if this username is already taken, right? If we find the user, we don't allow them to reuse that same username, right? So let's do that. So let's implement here, else if we only have username, okay, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to find the user, but only using the username, not the password. Okay, it's going to check to see if it finds a user. If it finds a user, it returns that one user, right? And else, right? If everything failed, okay, so this is return. If we don't have a username and password, and we also don't have a username, then this must be an admin user who's asking for all the users, right? Obviously, we might want to protect this, right, and check to see if the role of the currently logged in user is an admin. If so, then return the list of users. But we'll handle security a little later in assignment 6, right? For now, we'll leave it open. All right, so if I go back here and instead just provide Bob, I can also just return Bob by just a username or Alice or Janunzi. Returns that, oops, Anunzio. There it is. If it doesn't find it, it just comes back with empty. And I still have if I don't provide any arguments, I still return all the users. Does that make sense? Right. So I've implemented all things that we need for querying either for login or username. Okay. All right. Well, that's the raw JSON. Excellent. All right. So we have everything we need to implement the login and the username verification and on the client, right? So let's try and use this now from the client side, from the Angular application, so that we can actually log in or not. All right, so let's do that.